what you're raising is something that's so pivotal for all of us, kind of in this current moment where
Yeah.
it's like, how did we get to this point where we've stopped seeing each other as individual people, where we've
Yeah.
put everybody in these different camps? And I
Yeah.
think a lot of us
Yeah.
are in a place of wanting to somehow desegregate, right?
Yeah.
Like we want to find a way to do that. And
Yeah.
Zip knows you're human first, right?
Right.
Zip knows that he's lovable first. And so those two factors make Zip somebody who's appealing and people are
Yeah.
drawn to Zip. He shows people that they have value
Yeah.
by loving them. And so there's something so beautiful all the way through the book. So,
Mm.
your readers are going to, any of them who are dog lovers, I'm a dog lover,
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
going to relate to that unconditional love that dogs have, that
Exactly.
they never let you down.
I'm going to introduce this. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaefer, and I am Frank Schaefer. And usually I would be interviewing somebody like Melanie Brooks. In fact, a while back, I did interview her, and here's her book in case you've forgotten who she is. It's called A Hard Silence One Daughter Remaps Family Grief and Faith When HIV/AIDS Changed It All. And it's an incredible book, and I've talked about it in a lot of places. But today, Melanie is going to interview me, and she's very qualified to do so for a lot of reasons. First of all, she's a brilliant writer. I happen to know she's a brilliant editor because she came to my house and sat at this spot here and very kindly, I think for 12 hours, went through an earlier draft of my book and gave me all sorts of suggestions. So when you run into something in my new book called The Gospel of Zip that you really, really like, you can text Melanie and say, thank you for giving Frank so many good ideas. So that's who Melanie is. And the reason Melanie is interviewing me on my own podcast is because A, she knows the book backward, gave me a lot of good suggestions on it, but I'm trying to find ways very openly to promote my book to my viewers. Rather than just talking about myself, I want somebody to interview me. But I want to tell you right up front something interesting about the book you may not know, and that is I'm giving it away for free. So anybody that says, aha, Frank's trying to sell something here, no, I'm not. I'm pointing you to the gospelofzip.com, which is where on the website you will find references to the free video of me reading the whole book, all 8 hours and 10 minutes, whatever it is, that turns it into both an audio book if you want to just listen to it on YouTube or wherever you find it and are directed by the gospelofzip.com. Or you can watch it if you want to watch me reading. And it was professionally filmed by a producer director who spent years and years and years working for the McNeil Leo NewsHour and also produced many shows you've heard of on PBS. So it's beautifully done. He brought two old microphones that he has had for 20 or 30 years that are much warmer in tone than the new mics they made these days. So I got the royal treatment from an old guy who knows something. So the gospelofzip.com is where you will find the video on November 1. So if you like the sound of the book, I haven't sold you anything. And then at the same time, it will be on Amazon for sale and also as a Kindle book that you can pre-order. And we'll be talking about that. But the main thing is right now we're talking about the book that you can look at, listen to for free. And if you go to Amazon and buy the book, great. And that's it. So Melanie, thank you so much for interviewing me. Now we're going to trade places.
Yep. Sit back and
And
relax, Frank. You get to be.
and you're writing a book where you're going to require interviews from people. And you already reached out to me and said, can you interview me on a book that you're working on that we
Sure.
won't talk about because it's your
Yep.
secret to announce. But so I'll get used to you interviewing me on this, and then I'll do an even better
And we'll
job on
be
your
we'll be
book.
even more set.
Yeah. But I
So,
just want to thank you so much for everything you did for my book because
I was so glad, and I'm so excited to be having this conversation at this point, because you know, I think our conversation about your book started about a year and a half ago,
yeah,
and I've seen it kind of transform dramatically
yeah,
from, I think after you interviewed me, you sent me a draft and I read it, and it, just to see what it has become in
yeah.
the last
And
year.
by the way, you sent me some good strict notes saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, or I advise you to do that. And remember, I think I told you something early in the process that, look, I don't have a thin skin on this. When you
Right.
tell me to do something, you don't have to explain it. You don't have to say,
Yep.
oh, dance around it the way an editor would with a first time author who's going to be
Right.
sensitive. Just say, hey, I don't like this. It's going to, whatever. And unless there's a good reason to keep it in, I'll change it or rewrite it. And basically, I did that. I think I did about 90
I think
plus
you did.
percent.
I think you pretty much rewrote the whole book.
I did.
And so what I want to talk to you about, Frank, I want to talk about your process of writing this book and, the motivation behind it. And then we're going to talk about kind of what you're doing with it now.
Sure.
But I want to start with, first of all, when I first read the book, it was a draft of a book, and it was really you just wanting to talk about, that you used to be kind of a jackass and now you're a
The
really nice
word I use in
guy.
the book is asshole, and I give you
Asshole.
permission to
You used to
use
be
it.
kind of an asshole,
Yeah.
and now you're a really nice guy. And you wanted to kind of talk about how, kind of talk to people who were more like the asshole you
Yeah.
and say, like, here's what you need to do to shift. And
Yeah.
when I first read that book, the part that was most appealing to me in that draft was
Mm.
this beautiful love story
Yeah.
that you had kind of couched in there, but it wasn't central. It was kind of,
Mm.
intermixed in there. But this beautiful love story with your wife, Jeannie,
Yeah.
that I know now has become very central to the book.
Yes. Yes.
Um, but talk to me a little bit about, you started this project, what, 7 years ago? Is that
7 years ago, believe it or not. And I'm giving it away, which is just mind-boggling because I was trying to prorate over this, what 7 years of work is worth, and I can't calculate that on my humble level. But I
right?
think it's appropriate that the book I've worked on longest in my lifetime somehow matches the fact I'm also 73. And at the point I'm at in life, it's about actually trying to get something done, not
Mhm.
just the next step. So,
Yeah,
giving it away makes sense because in a way, when you work on something 7 years, it's priceless anyway to you,
right.
if not to other people. So, I don't know. That's not an answer to your question. So what did
Well,
you
no,
want?
so let's go back to 7 years ago. Let's go
Yeah.
to 7 years ago. You sat down, at your laptop.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're somebody
Well, two
who
things
writes
happened seven
first
years
or
ago that I think triggered this book. I began to my dog Zip that you can see on the cover. I got 9 years ago, and about 7 years ago, I started to think something that was sort of a new thought to me, and that was, that old uh, standby sentence. What would Jesus do when you're faced with an idea that might not be a good idea? And as somebody who grew up evangelical, um, although I left that background, the what would Jesus do question's a pretty good one. But I began to ask myself another question and realized that I wasn't joking when I would say it to myself. And that would be, what would Zip do? And by Zip, I mean, dogs. So Zip's always happy to see people. When you come home, that's the best thing that happened to Zip that day. Zip doesn't do calculated things like half greetings or semi enthusiasm. Everything is the most wonderful thing that ever happened to him. And ordinary things inspire Zip massively. Oh, I'm going to eat now. Oh, a walk. Oh, I've never done that before. It's all new to him.
you've never
And
come home
so
before. You're here.
yeah, you've never been home before and you've been away for a week with your wife and now you're back. This is the best thing. I can't even breathe. Literally, I'm having an asthma attack. I'm running around. I'm not wagging my tail. I'm wagging my whole body. And I started to think to myself, I put two things together. And one, sort of everything I've learned at that point in 50 years of marriage, because we're going into our 57th year now, that I've learned I could have shortcut the whole system if I had just said, what would Zip do, or any dog that loves you? In other words, it's uncalculated, it's sincere love. When Zip looks into my eyes or gives me a kiss or whatever, his whole person is loving me.
Yeah.
There's no sort of hold back. You weren't nice to me this morning. None of that business. So that was one good series of questions. And then the other thing was, and this is a little more personal, if you want to put it that way, was that it's taken me a lifetime of being married to a girl I married when we were teenagers and came out of that sort of groomed to be an asshole by divine right state, um, to see that my wife, who I adore more than anything on earth at this point of my life, um, and I know this will sound odd, but most of the time, 90% of the time, she's incredibly happy. And there was a lot of our marriage that wasn't So I started asking myself a question. What have I transitioned to be in terms of a lover and housemate and friend that means that the person I'm with is not on edge and not tense, but genuinely content and happy. And it's not, and I began to realize it isn't just that Jeannie's old and wiser than we ever were, but I'm a different person. So that her discontent at one stage of our marriage and our lives that went on for far too long had radically changed to a point where most of the time I was seeing a very happy woman in my home. And I began to think about, don't take this for granted. Let's think through this process. And then one last third thing. It seemed to me that the correlation between who Zip is and my wife being happy when she wasn't always happy before, the only thing that had changed was me. And then I began to look at the thing in broader terms of not just how did I change and why is Jeannie happy now and she was unhappy before, but what are some lessons here that I can share with other people at the end of my life to save them all the trouble that I've been through by not knowing what I know now? In other words, it was like coming to a realization that, by dropping red meat and butter out of my diet, my heart condition, I'm in better shape physically, and I want to pass that on to my grandchildren. And say, look, when I was sucking down porterhouse steaks and drinking half a bottle of red wine every night, in the end, Jeannie had a heart attack. She paid for that diet that we did when we were in our 20s and 30s because it sticks with you like smoking. I wasn't a smoker, but just like I would tell my grandchildren now, hey, you know what? Nothing wrong with meat and a glass of wine once in a while, but you have to understand that the reason Jeannie had a heart attack and had a blockage in her artery is because just like I had sun damage cancer removed back in the day, I didn't know about sunblock, but I do now. So by the way, hey, Nora, put some sunblock on. I've had 3 cancers cut off my head. I'm trying to save her the trouble. So those are the 3 things. Why is Jeannie happy when she wasn't before? What have I learned from watching Zip in terms of just if humans behaved like Zip, we'd be fine. There'd be no hatred, there'd be no animosity, there'd be no retribution, there'd be no viciousness. And then the last bit is what am I telling other people, and most particularly my own children and grandchildren? What would if I preach them a sermon, what would it be? Well, nobody likes sermons. So I'm going to tell a series of stories that illustrate what I'm trying to say. And these aren't parables. This is all real. It all really happened.
Yeah.
But can I leave the people who read my stuff a little better off than I was when I was trying to figure out how to love and how to be a father and how to have a relationship? So that's a very long answer, but that's really the genesis of the book. And then I started writing, but I didn't know how to approach it. So I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And then eventually you and a couple other people would read early drafts and say, you're close on this, but not on this, because I would tend to go off at tangents. And then you helped me, and a couple other people really helped me narrow it down. What is this really about? Well, it's about Zip, and it's about Genie, and it's about love. And let's not make it too footnotey, even though it is footnoted. And let's not drag in everything, including the kitchen sink, to prove you're clever, because you're a little bit you have a little bit of an inferiority complex when it comes to your educational level that you didn't graduate with. Get over that and just write a book from the heart and let the best bits be. And I hope I've written a book that, I know this sounds presumptuous, but that can actually change lives.
Well, I mean, I think that, when I first read your book, you talked about that inferiority complex, because one of the things I was saying was
Right,
you keep using other people to say what you want to say.
right.
I think you can just say it,
Yeah,
and but one fascinating piece of this book is it's extensively researched. Like I would call it kind of a hybrid book. Like it's
yeah,
part memoir, but also part kind of cultural anthropology
yeah,
text in some ways, right? Because you've done some extensive research
yeah,
on kind of some historical connections, some cultural, anthropological, sociological connections that kind of speak to our current culture, that speak
yeah,
to, the things that you have kind of discovered in your own personal life. And so talk to me a little bit about just beyond, kind of feeling
yeah,
like, well, I needed other intellectuals to
I
kind
need
of
to prove
validate what I was
I've read a
saying.
book or two. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But, talk to me a little bit about why that was important to you to do that research,
Yeah.
like why
Well,
you kind of went looking for that.
one thing that was important to me, where I really did not know anything, and now I know quite a bit, if I can put it that way, was why are dogs the way they are?
Yeah.
And there are some incredible researchers like Brian Hare and Vanessa Woods at the Duke Canine Center who have spent a lifetime doing this. And so, one book leads to another, and you realize you read a book by Brian Hare and Vanessa Woods, and well, who are they recommending in their footnotes? And then you read that book. So the first thing was a huge pleasure to me because I love Zip immensely. And I started reading books that explained him to me. And I've had some other dogs I've loved immensely, but I've never studied dogs. So I know some history and I know a little bit of science and I know a little of this, a little of that, some general knowledge. I've done some reading. And by the way, doing my podcast helps because,
Yeah.
I
You can
interview
meet people.
people and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, I can email them and say, hey, you're an authority in this area. Could you help me? But the big one for me that was just brand new and so wonderful, like discovering, a new food or a new country, was reading books on the evolution and biology of dogs, and particularly really learning that, there is such a thing as a basic dog, that they evolved separately from wolves at one point, whatever disagreements there are about, how long ago that was. Village dogs that roam around places like the Mexico City dump and get their food, and how they adopt some of the garbage truck dump drivers. And that same process going on with Zip actually happens in nature because these dogs are not strays. They've never been anybody's pets, but the behavior stays the same, the lack of viciousness, the cooperation, the fact that they're always looking for a human to basically domesticate. I wasn't imagining this. This is all real. And then getting into things that are a little sadder, the eugenic beginning in the 19th century of modern dog breeding. I'm not talking about people that had sheepdogs and this and that back in the day. But the kind of modern idea that came out of the 19th century, that there's a way to, the perfectibility of dogs, that,
Mhm.
the ordinary basic dog is just a stray or a mutt. We don't want that. We want it prettier. We want it cuter. We want it sexier. We want it this and that. So in reading people like Jessica Pierce, who's a biomedical and animal rights activist, I began to get some of the truth about the fact that, we bred dogs that can barely breathe, barely walk, and it's all like a human idea. And interesting things that I learned that I didn't know before. Like, for instance, if you take the most overbred dog, a pug that can barely breathe, and a Chihuahua and a little Pekingese, if you don't neuter them and they all start mating, within about 10 to 12 generations, they all go back to basic dog again. All that
Oh,
human stuff,
wow.
it all goes away. So basically, if you mingle those dogs, if they breed with other dogs and eventually get into a pack in a village, 10, 15 generations down the thing, you wouldn't say, oh, well, this dog has a little bit of collie. They all go back to basic
Right.
dog.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't have to explain to you that when you read about breeding perfect dogs and eugenic kind of breeding and selection, that of course it rings all sorts of bells about other things that came out of the 19th century,
Sure.
as in the eugenics movement that led to terrible things during the fascist era in Europe and all over the globe and so on. So the language of the perfectibility of an animal, we can make this better.
Right.
So I don't say in the book anything like you're an evil person if you've got a dog that's a particular breed. Of course not, because that's where we're all at. Like Zip is not a village dog. Zip is a mixture of Chihuahua and Dachshund and Jack Russell, and he comes from somewhere, and I love him the way he is. So
Right.
I'm not regretting that.
Right.
But I got into things which then sort of illumined some bigger subjects again, because sort of what we did to dogs is kind of what 100 years later we tried to do to people.
Yeah.
And then if you take a jump into our present age, it's mind blowing because now you have some of these tech bros paying $50,000 a pop to have their embryos that they're using IVF on, not to conceive a baby because their wife or girlfriend can't have a child, but to get a perfect baby. And we're not talking about screening for defects in
Or
the
disease,
womb
right?
and maybe aborting some child that is severely defective. We're talking about a process of actually trying to make perfect babies. So there's a direct correlation between these things that kind of blew my mind. Now that's not what my book is about, but
No,
that would be the sort of rabbit holes that I'd
that you
start going
started going
down.
down, right?
And
And
then
then,
and I might mention it briefly to make a bigger point, but you came along and said, well, wait a minute, this is not what the book is about.
right.
But that process, even though there were some big, deep cuts made, got me to a place where I found what the book was really about. But the trace elements of some of that deeper research are still there because the context in which I'm telling people that relationships count, and it's not how smart you are or tall you are or pretty you are that counts.
Right.
It's the fact that you're a human being and I love you or you love somebody. So, it does all have something to do with the same picture.
Well, it does. And, I have come to your house a couple of times, and that day that I spent, kind of a full day at your house, Zip spent a lot of time with me.
Yes, he did. He knew
And
you were a fixture.
I got to experience Zip in
Yeah,
all of his loving glory,
yeah,
cuddled up next to my feet or near the
yeah,
little space heater. And you're right. He's one of those dogs that just loves you,
yeah,
and you love him back because he loves you so
yeah.
much, right? And
And you
that
know
there's
why
such,
he spent time with you, not only because you're a lovely person, and he senses that,
but he likes that
but he
space.
assumed she's stuck. She must have, there's something, if I'm stuck in bed after a flu shot and I'm having a reaction, or when I had COVID, he didn't leave my side. It was like, well, when do you ever get out there and do your business to eat and pee? Because you've been here for 15 hours and I
Right,
haven't seen you move. Well, he
right.
saw you stuck at this desk right here. And he was like, okay, fine. Oh, she's still there. I better keep her company
Yeah, yeah.
because Frank's running around the house and Genie seems fine. But, Melanie did he tie
Did
her
he
to her
trap her?
chair? Has she, does she have a harness and
Is she
leash?
chained to that desk until
Yeah,
the
should I bring
editing
her
is done?
water?
Yeah, yeah, I know. But so you have this kind of beautiful thread about Zip
Yeah,
in the book. And one of my favorite parts of the book is you are taking Zip on a walk through
yeah,
your neighborhood.
yeah.
And you demonstrate how Zip has basically helped you forge relationships
Yes,
with all of your neighbors
yes,
and in a really beautiful way, like the way you write it, but also the way you bring in these different personalities of your
yeah,
neighbors
yeah,
is beautiful. So will you talk a little bit about that and kind of
yeah.
how you
Well,
made
it
that
that
connection?
absolutely reflects my life because if I mean, I'll be very specific with a couple of neighbors that I have. If you have a bunch of neighbors in your neighborhood during a heated election that are putting up Trump signs, all right, it would be easy to write them off and sort of avert your gaze and not. But two problems arise. One, these are people I've known for 40 years because
Mhm.
I've lived in the same neighborhood for 47 years now. And these are particular people who I've known the majority of that time. And I've already known that our politics don't mesh, including one of my neighbors who flew his American flag upside down on the day on the day that
Biden was
Obama was
elected.
elected.
Oh,
So,
Obama.
I know where he's coming from. But here's the point. Let's say I was trying to avoid this person, and some neighbors, having been raised in a personality cult Christian commune, I'm allergic to people in my house in the sense that I was volunteered into open home Christian work. There was no privacy, no silence, no, it was awful. No way to raise a kid, or by that way have a dog. I mean, it would be terrible
Right.
for any animal, let alone a human animal. So I came out of that background very kind of gun shy about a lot of things. And part of the warming process of becoming less of an asshole to Genie and more of a husband also was sort of coming out of my shell with my neighbors. But what I found was that the big icebreaker was my dogs.
Mhm.
Because if your dog likes a neighbor's dog, or they're asking after your dog, or you're apologizing because your dog's just pooped on their lawn, but you've got a plastic bag and you're picking it up, it's sort of like trying to be a snob, or which I'm not, but be something. But dogs immediately humble a dog person
Mhm.
because your dog is basic biological and does its thing. It's going to poop on somebody's lawn, even if there's a Trump sign and you're trying to avoid that person. So you can either deal with it and pretend you
Right.
live in a world in which you don't talk to those people, or you can say, maybe Zip knows something I don't. And basically go with Zip's view of the world, which is not to first ask someone, how did you vote? Or do you believe in Jesus? Or are you a Mormon? Or, are you a feminist? Or are you gay? Or are you trans? The first thing Zip wants to know is when I jump up, will you reach down so I can lick your hand? Because I want to kiss you. I
Right.
love humans.
Yeah.
I love everybody. So that influence, as I was out with Zip, it was sort of an aha moment where I'm saying, if I could just get over myself, because actually this friend up the street, and I call him a friend, um, who has his Trump signs up and everything, several of them I talk about at the beginning of the book. Um, his big thing actually isn't right wing politics. His big thing is he's sick of the gentrification of our neighborhood. And as he puts it very, very bluntly, they don't know shit. So basically, they don't know how the water system works because they always think someone else does it. And if we get in a war, we know one thing for sure: none of their sons will be in the military because people like them don't volunteer. They go to college and they do these fancy things. It's a real class thing. And so actually, by getting to know him better, I don't in any sense say, "Oh, that makes me feel differently about the MAGA vote politically." But it's like, wait a minute. I got things in my life too.
Right.
So if you ask me why I don't want to have people over, it's not that I'm a left-wing liberal snob that doesn't like the human race. I was sitting in a room unable to get to sleep all through my childhood because of the noise coming from all the students living on our house and sleeping on the floor. You have to get to know Frank a little bit and cut him a little slack, walk in his shoes for a couple minutes. And of course, that's what dogs do. They take you as you are. But somebody else does that too, and that's my wife, Jeannie.
Yeah. Well,
Jeannie's
and I
for,
want to, so
yeah,
I want to get to Genie and, so Zip is kind of this thread who's, weaving through in that
yeah,
question of like, what would Zip do, right?
yeah,
And you have that kind of phrase that I think you took from one of the writers, you quote the survival of the friendliest,
yeah,
right?
Jess,
And
yes, exactly.
yeah,
Which is Brian Hare and Vanessa Woods actually wrote a book by that title.
yeah,
And I won't go on at length here because you have a lot of questions, but just tell you the way they got into it, and they explain in that book, is through their research of canines.
right.
Because
Yeah,
it was like, well, why are dogs prospering globally and wolves are going extinct? It's because dogs understand cooperation, not just with humans, but with each other. Their packs don't tear each other apart.
right.
Dogs don't, and so forth. And so basically, I talk about Vanessa Woods and Brian Hare through the book, and I reference them in short order because of you. I don't get into a whole thing.
You don't give
Um,
lengthy quotes.
yeah,
That was my pushback, right?
yeah,
But
and it
I
was a good
think,
pushback. That and be
yeah,
nicer.
be but be nicer to yourself. That was one
Yeah,
of the things
yeah,
I told you
yeah,
too. You were
yeah,
awfully hard on yourself. But I think what you're raising is something that's so pivotal for all of us, kind of in this current moment where
yeah,
it's like, how did we get to this point where we've stopped seeing each other as individual people, where we've,
yeah,
kind of put everybody in these different camps? And I
yeah,
think all of us, I won't say all of us, but I think a lot of us
yeah,
are in a place of wanting to somehow like desegregate, right?
yeah,
Like we want to find a way to do that. And
yeah.
I think, using Zip as kind of the like, Zip knows you're human first, right?
Right.
Zip knows that he's lovable first. And so those two factors make Zip somebody who's appealing and people are
Yeah,
drawn to Zip, right?
yeah,
And he shows people that they have value
yeah.
by loving them. And so there's something so beautiful all the way through the book. So,
Mm.
your readers are going to any of them who are dog lovers, I'm a dog lover,
Yeah,
are
yeah,
going to relate to that piece of, that unconditional love that dogs have, that
exactly.
they never let you down on
Yeah,
that
yeah.
level, right? But the other piece, I mean, I think the bigger part of your story that
Mm.
I loved so much is your relationship with Jeannie. And I've
Yeah,
seen you
exactly.
and Jeannie together. You are beautiful as a couple in terms of, the love you have for each other is just
Mhm.
palpable in, when you're together. I can
Yeah,
see how much you adore her. You can see how much she adores you, right?
yeah,
But you talk about kind of in the summation of your book that, your relationship with Jeannie is, kind of a dramatic survival
it
story, right?
is.
And,
Yeah,
we can kind of preface it with you met when you were 17, she was 18,
yeah.
right? She came to L'Abri Fellowship, which was the commune. Uh,
Not knowing where she was, by the
right.
way, thinking
Yeah,
it was a youth hostel or something.
right. So, in Switzerland, where that your parents were running, and
Yeah,
you met, and what started as just kind of a relationship for teenagers she ended up getting pregnant. Your
sharing Beatles
parents,
albums.
right, sharing Beatles albums. Your parents, because of the religious place that they stood in
Sure.
their lives, and the moralistic kind of values that they put,
Yeah, yeah,
required that you get married, right?
yeah.
So you got married when you were 17.
I was 18. I
18,
was
she was
17 when I
19.
married her, and she had just turned 19. She was 18, I was 17. And given
Yeah.
the way our birthdays are staggered, there's parts of the time she's 2 years older than me, and the rest of the time, I like it better when she's only a year old. I always
So,
feel,
so much of what you do throughout the story is you kind of give us, kind of the portrait of your lives now. And one
sure.
of the things that's really beautiful is you interviewed Jeannie and just
Yeah,
kind of at various points asked her
sure, sure.
questions, right? And she's answering things
Yeah.
and
And what was
leaving
funny
in the
about
kind of,
that, and I'll let you get back to your question, was
yeah.
that early in this project, about 5 years ago, when I was getting into it, I said, okay, you'll read my book, right? Because she always gives me great notes. You are her surrogate on this project because she wouldn't read the book. And she said to me literally about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when I was pushing, she said, look, and she wasn't joking. She says, I already had one heart attack. I lived this story. I'm not reading it.
Mhm.
And she trusts me enough to know that I would go to someone like you and say, my wife's not reading this. Will you please tell me where I've stepped over the line? And you did. And I cut
Yeah.
some stuff where you said, no,
Yeah.
this is too intimate. And I trusted you on that and a couple
Right.
other women because I would tell you, as you remember, I said, Jeannie's not reading this. It's not fair to her. Now, what she did do is let me record answers to multiple little interviews, not like this interview, but a question here, a question there. Other times I would just, she'd say a line, I'd come in and type it up
Yeah.
and so forth. But she trusts at this point in our marriage, she trusts me to accurately reflect exactly what she said and didn't say. I'm not playing games with that, even though she won't read it. But I got some people like you who I trust, both as a writer and as a female voice that will speak up for Jeannie, become her
Yeah.
advocate.
Yeah.
And I didn't, one thing I followed you 100% on, by the way, that you'll see when, if you ever reread the book, you don't have to because you've already had a heart attack too, or maybe you haven't, but you will now. But what I'm saying is
I'm going to listen to it because it's
whenever
going to
you
be for
said
free.
this is too intimate, this is too private, you can't say that because I get, well, I'm a novelist too. No,
Right.
no, this is good for the story. But I had to, and she would have put a red line through some things and everything that you said, no, this is too much. I cut because this was, I wanted to be fair. But if I don't know how you would balance the percentage of this book, but if you cut it up and just said how much of this is Jeannie's words,
Hmm.
there's more of Jeannie's words when it's talking about here's how you do things than
Right.
there are my words. My
Right.
words are like, here's how you don't do things. This is
Right.
me when you don't want to be me. But when I say a friend came to dinner and asked Jeannie, how do you make this work? Then I have what she says. And the same about how do you make sex work? How do you make marriages stick? What is good childcare?
Right.
From a woman who's raised three fabulous grown children and five incredible grandchildren, and who, along with me, was the child caregiver. She took an early retirement from her publishing company she had, took a big in,
Right.
income cut because she said, well, my first two grandchildren grew up in Europe and we saw them on a lot of visits. But finally, I've got kids who are nearby. I'm not wasting this. Forget my being the fact that I'm a publisher. I'm
Right.
done. I'm closing
Right.
the company. The people who want to buy it, and I didn't put all these details in the book, but the people who wanted to buy it said on the condition you stay on.
Yeah.
Like, and she said, no, I'm done. I'm going to have Social Security and Medicare in 2 years. I'm finished. I'm raising these kids now. So, she and I made a choice to be very close to our grandchildren, but that's all in the book. And I don't say
Right.
it. I let her explain
Well,
as
and I
a
think that's
woman.
wise,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
think I said to you at one point, right? Like we have a lot of, you know, older white males who are speaking to us and telling us what to do, right?
yeah,
And you didn't want, and one of the things, you were smart about in
yeah.
the way you wrote this was you didn't center your voice as
No.
the authority, right? And I
There's
think
only
that
one
that's,
authority in this book.
yeah,
There's two authorities. There's a canine authority.
yeah,
Okay. And I'll put it this way, and this sounds too on the nose, but I'll literally say it. If you read or listen to my book, do what Zip does and do what Genie says.
right.
And
I
if you
and I think that
do,
that's, you
if
know,
you do, you will have a good life.
right,
Period.
right. Yep.
Because if you do what Zip does and you do what Genie says, and here's the golden thing about Genie, and this is, hand on heart, what she says is what she does.
Hmm.
This what her words are not like, oh, she says this in theory. And one of the tragedies of my own evangelical missionary parents is they didn't do what they said.
Right,
So I
right.
talk very honestly in the book about it. And in fact, in one place, I don't know if this was in it when you went through it last, but you'll see it. I say, I've still been covering for my parents. Isn't that pathetic? I'm 73. And up to this point, for instance, in my memoir, Crazy for God, I was telling the truth. My father, for instance, was abusive to my mom, and I talk about it in that book. But I also say, but, he took us to museums, we did all this stuff, and I was still trying to dress it up. Because your book, by the way, A Hard Silence, is about hiding the fact that your dad had AIDS. It's a
Hmm.
whole different story because he didn't want to be known as an AIDS patient in a day when that meant you were this, that, and the other, and so forth. Well, very similarly, like your dad, I didn't hide who my parents were, but I dressed it up for years.
Right.
But my mom was so generous, and my dad knew about art, and they played classical music. And the fact of the matter is, mom wrote books on how to have a family, and she completely neglected her children, which is why I could hardly read when I was 10 years old and finally dumped in a British boarding school. I was dyslexic. But the basic problem was she would hand me off to a student and say, try to teach Frankie something.
Yeah.
And that was it. It was like, it wasn't homeschooling, it was home non-schooling. And then she's writing these books. And then my dad would write books about Christians and Christian theology and love. And my mom would from time to time show me the bruises on her arm as an explanation for why I had heard screaming in the room next door and been woken up in the middle of the night. And this went on for years.
Right.
So the fact is, they lived a lie. And that's not an excuse for the fact that I turned out to be an asshole, but it's that is the example I had. And this is in the book, and I mentioned this, so I'm not, sorry if it's a spoiler, but I have a very brief passage in this book that I'd gone into a little more in Crazy for God, but I have a tiny little mention of the fact, because again, I didn't want to go down a rabbit hole, that when my father quit hitting my mother is when I was 15 or 16 and held a knife to him in our kitchen and said, if you hit mom again, I will kill you.
Hmm.
And my mom, when she was 88 years old, told me, after that, Fran never touched me again, never hit me again. And I said, well, did I scare him? Because I wouldn't have actually done anything. And I'm sure he knew that.
Right.
And she says, no, he didn't know he had ever been found out. He thought he
Hmm.
had gotten away with it. And the fact that you knew completely instantly, he shut it down.
Shifted it for him.
And so that's part of my background, not just an escapee from the evangelical world. So when I read Tia Leving's book, for instance, on how her husband beat her in A Well-Trained Wife, thank God I didn't go there, but I've lived in that household. I've been a son of hers. If you can put it this way, I get Tia
Yeah.
because she was treated the way my dad treated my mother, and I'm always thankful that I did that thing with my dad, which I can hardly describe. I'm not even going to repeat it here because it just cuts me to it. Just is horrible
Yeah.
because it was like taking a pill that whatever else was happening, I didn't go there,
Right. Right.
but it was just. But that's my background. So, the book's not about that, but there's no way
No.
to talk about how my marriage grew into something that I find wonderful and that my wife is happy without saying hey, Genie stuck with this program with somebody who, that's the example I had.
Well, and I think that that's, your book is putting forth a model, right? It's putting forth an example of
Yeah.
here are two people who had a lot of odds stacked against them. There
Yeah.
were a lot of reasons why this relationship should have failed at many points,
Yes. And I would never have
right?
bet for these people now. If
No,
you told
nobody
me
would
their story, I'd say,
really,
this is not working.
right?
But I,
But
and I know this will sound maudlin, but that's because they don't know Genie.
right,
Because Genie is the kindest and toughest person I've ever met. And I mean that literally. And I've known so many people, but I've never seen a combination of toughness and kindness like hers.
right,
She is like cold cut, hard, frozen steel when it comes to certain things. And then on the other hand, this is the warmest and most forgiving and generous person on the planet.
right,
Literally. I don't know anybody else like her.
right.
So I was the most fortunate young fool on earth that the room I stumbled into was the best place I could have ever spent my life. If this dyslexic high school dropout, angry, young, damaged man was ever going to find redemption, it wasn't like finding the
Right.
one because I didn't know anything about Jeannie. And she wasn't that person when I married her.
Yeah. But I think that that's the thing, right? That you're setting forth this example, you're setting forth this model
Yeah.
of here's our marriage that survived all of these things over the
Yeah.
last, what did you say, 59 years, right?
No, it will be soon.
57.
57 right now.
57. The last 57 years, right?
Yeah.
We've gone through so many different things, and
Yeah.
you give us, kind of these snapshots and portraits along the way,
Yeah.
right? But you're also saying, I'm not saying follow everything that we have
Not
done,
at all.
but you're saying like here's a model of
Yeah.
how it can work,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's what's very generous about your book is it's not saying you have to do exactly
Not
what
at
we
all.
did, you have to be exactly who we are, you
Yeah.
have to follow this advice and do this, but instead it's saying learn from us, learn something from us and apply it to your
Yeah.
situation,
And I'll
apply
tell
it
you
to
an
your
exact
world.
parallel because I've had this in my life. I was so lucky that I got polio when I was 2, and my left leg is atrophied from the knee down, and it looks like I have a club foot. There's an ugly part of my body, and I'm about 4 inches, according to my orthopedic specialist, shorter than I would have been. I have a son who's 6'4", and I'm like 5'6.5" at best, and shrinking rapidly now as an old guy. But I'm about 4 to 5 inches shorter than I would have been. So and to guys, height's a thing. So I limp, I have a bad leg, and I'm shorter. All right. I have, over the course of my lifetime, been able to help a number of people who are really stuck with something. For instance, and this has happened several times, and actually more than several times, um, there are times when I have seen somebody, a younger boy, say, in a wheelchair or on crutches or whatever, or somebody with sight in one eye. And I don't go up and make a big point about my leg, but there have been times I've taken my shoe off, taken my sock off, pulled up my pants, and said, by the way, see this? I was told I could never ski because if I broke this, I'd lose the leg. But guess what? I won a silver medal in some Swiss races downhill. Not Olympics, nothing special, but just local school things. You're going to be all right.
Mhm.
And if you've never experienced anything, and I've done the same thing with some people who have been married and having problems, and I've done the same thing with some high school people who fell in love, and everybody's telling them you're too young. And I'm saying, this girl that you love is one of the most wonderful people I've ever met,
Mhm.
and you're great, and you're so much more mature than I was. And this isn't because they're pregnant or something. Don't listen to everyone that's telling you, you're too young to fall in love. Maybe not.
Right.
And I have found that the weaknesses, the sorrow, the failings, the physical disabilities, the fact that I'm severely dyslexic and I can't spell a word has added up to being able to relate to people who have their own problems.
Right.
And I'm not saying, hey, look what I did, look at me. It's the opposite. And I'm sorry for the language, but it's like, I have been in the position of a totally fucked up young male. I have been in the position of someone who, limps down the street and wore long pants through my whole childhood because I was ashamed of my leg. There are a lot of things in my life where I understand certain things that if I had been like my Marine son, 6'4" and a god, he looks like a god. Uh, I mean, we had the most crazy thing happen. This is totally, and it's not in the book, but it's public knowledge because it happened out there. But when John and I were doing our book together, Keeping Faith, a father-son story about love in the United States Marine Corps, the People magazine got wind of it, and they came to my house. And he hated this, by the way. I mean, he's an enlisted Marine about to go to Afghanistan, and they're taking pictures of him. Well, he made their list of 10 most eligible bachelors, and he's 19.
I love that.
So here's this short, limping father next to this 6'4" God who's on People magazine. And, you know, and people have always joked, hey, whose son is he? So forth and so on. And if you look at his face, you know, he's my boy. But nevertheless, being 4 or 5 inches shorter than you were going to be with a bad leg and all the rest, and growing up in a weird commune with a father that hit your mom, there's a lot of levels on which I relate to imperfection.
Sure.
And my message is, if a fucked up, room to be an asshole like me can learn to love as intensely as I've learned to love from a woman and from your dog, don't give up on yourself.
Right.
Because and at one point in the book, and this is a little new section you didn't see, but it makes, in my read aloud thing, it's very forceful, although I had trouble reading it because I felt so emotional. At one point, I just look at the screen and I go through, not these things I've just told you, but I'm saying, look, if two teenagers who got pregnant in a personality cult commune 57 years ago with no college degree between them, and I look and I just say, don't give up, because our problems may have been different than yours, but this idea that there's a right person out there, and if you just meet them and you get a master's degree and, this capstone to your life because now everything's thing and you've thought it all through, to my way of thinking, that's where the trouble is, because of the expectation. But if you start out saying, I'm just grateful that we managed to make this work somehow in spite of all this, then I think you have something to share. And so what I'm pointing to when I point to Genie is, this is how you do it. Mm-hmm. When I'm pointing to myself, it's, this is how you don't do it.
But eventually you get to the point where you're both doing it together.
And yes, and we are.
And I think that that's also, something to be celebrated, that you can write about that part of your life now and say, here we are. I think a lot of people kind of go out seeking, the self-help books and the things, but I also think that the reason that memoir and personal stories are so pivotal is because we're all just kind of looking for how other people are doing it.
That's it.
Right? Like, we just want to know, how are they getting through these times? How are they coping with these circumstances, right? And you're giving them that model in this book.
And the thing that was useful with Genie is she helped me unblinkingly look at who I was.
Yeah.
And she does not do self-pity, and she doesn't do, your father was a jerk, so you can be a jerk. And if with my background, of course, I understand you. No, she was saying, this is our life and we need to move forward. And she always did that. But she also forgave and pointed to real solutions. For instance, I'll give you one example that I talk about in the book. My son, Francis, was incredibly dyslexic, and I am too. This is pre-Google, so there was no way. She went and found one of the few real dyslexia experts, and she got a therapist and she got them involved. And as I saw him, he's in his 50s, he's 50 years old now, but as I saw him go from a 7-year-old who was having all these dyslexic problems, it brought all my vivid memories back, things that I'd never resolved, and go forward. And then Jeannie didn't just say, go get therapy. She says, well, look, Dr. Jan Schwartz has been so helpful to Francis. And I know it's too late in some ways for you, but I think a lot of your anger comes from this. Yeah. Would you ever talk to her? Because you know her, you like her. And she always found a way to help me, but she helped me. She didn't help some theoretical husband who should go to therapy. Right. She found the person, got this woman, Jill Knowles and Jan Schwartz, working with my dyslexic son, and came to me and said, maybe your parents' suspicion of therapy, that these are all spiritual problems and who needs therapy? Well, science seems to be working pretty well for Francis. Why don't you give it okay, I'll go to one session.
Right.
But when I went, because I really loved Jeannie and really wanted to change, I began to listen to what I was being told. And it was like, oh yeah, the person you're describing is pretty much me. So now you're telling me I suffer from depression and should deal with, well, explain how, tell me how this works. And so that kind of incremental help from a loving person who nevertheless really found practical ways to help you was a model that I began to really benefit from. And so, that's those stories are sort of in the book. But of course,
Well,
just
and you're giving her to us, right? You're
yeah,
giving that model to
yeah,
us. And
yeah,
I want to kind of emphasize the giving piece because that's where we're moving into in terms of this book
yeah.
is, you I heard you say on a recent clip that you're going to be
A
putting out there
video,
about
yeah.
this book. You said of all your books, this is the only important one,
It
right?
is.
And I
Yeah,
recognize, at the time that you wrote the other ones. It wasn't like they weren't important,
yeah,
but talk to me a little bit about that and talk to me about how that connects to the fact that you've decided to not go the traditional publishing
yeah,
route, to not get a high advance, which you likely would at this point because you've
yeah,
been a best-selling writer. You have, a long track record of publishing, right? But
yeah,
instead of doing that, you're putting it out there for free. Talk to me first of all about the reasoning,
yeah,
why you think it's the only important book you've
yeah.
written, and
I can go
also
through.
why you're giving it away.
If I get off track too much here, edit me a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, but let me just sort of randomly throw some things out. First of all, the scuttlebutt in the publishing world now, and of course this isn't true, is no one reads. But of course, the truth of the matter is less people read.
Mhm.
The only thing they do read is text. So the first thing I did, and this is not order of priority here, but I'm just explaining what I did with this book. There are no chapters, there are just sections. And some of those sections are 15 to 30 seconds long. Nothing's more than a 2 minute read. And it just goes one, two, three, four, up to, I think it's 347, or no, 345 is the last section, I
Yeah.
believe, or 346. So basically, when you open the book, if you're looking at it printed, which it will be on Amazon, or if you watch it on video by going to thegospelofzip.com and then going to YouTube where the free video is of me reading it or you just listening to it. Two things happen. There's a big, beautiful numeral that my producer, Ernie Gregg, crafted that comes up. It just goes to black and then a big number, 1, 2, 3, 4. The other thing that happens is you hear my voice saying, 233, 234. So anybody flipping through knows where they are. It's like chapter headings.
Right.
But I'm speaking the language of the moment. They're not big, long chapters that you have to run on. We're talking the average section when I'm reading it probably takes between 25 and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So I have first of all disciplined myself as a writer to craft a book that my teenage grandchildren who spend way too much time on their phones will look really familiar to them because these are text length sections.
Mhm.
Okay. And a few that are a little longer. One, two, I'm giving it away for free in the medium where most people see my stuff. Because the fact of the matter is, some of my videos have run to 1 million views, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not bragging, but they have. But
You
they're
can brag. That's a good
meaningless.
brag.
Yeah, I have like one on JD Vance that has 1 million plus views, and I've got one, where I'm cutting roses in my garden that went to 1 million views and all this kind of stuff. But the thing is, they're great in the set if you just want to get your name and your face out there. But at the end of the day, I don't think they really help anybody because we all are already in these conflicted things, or we've already got, I'm competing with a bunch of cute videos of people's kitty cats or whatever. So basically, I thought, listen, I really want to change some lives here. I can't do it if I'm greedy and just try to make money. So I'm going to do this for free. I'm going to give this away. The second thing is it has to be in a form that most people these days are comfortable with shorter attention spans. Instead of lamenting that and saying, "Oh, you ought to, blah blah blah." No, if you're going to preach a sermon, speak the native language.
Right.
And I'm talking, to a French crowd in French. I'm in Italy speaking Italian. I'm not saying, you got to learn my language. So I have written a book that does not have chapters. It has little sections that run about the length of a text. They all hang together, they all tell a story. And the reason I'm giving it away is really simple. And that is, you hear this old hackney phrase, it's time to give something back. But in this case, I really mean it. And that is, I am the undeserving recipient of the love of an incredible woman and a beautiful little animal. This is a gift. And for the same reason that we don't like people that sell salvation, they pretend they're telling you about Jesus, they're really raising money. I cannot, I can't do that. I can't say, I think I can turn your life around. And by the way, you owe me 18 bucks. Now, if you want to buy it on Amazon for $18, fine, but the whole thing's free on YouTube if you go to thegospelofzip.com, because I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth. And I grew up, I have a word in the book that I use. I talk about God cash. So my mother says, "Oh, you need a second honeymoon," and she gives me a mob-sized wad of money. It comes from book royalties. So, you know, we all know that the dirty little secret of religion is the money, or the threesome with the younger women who are working with the great preacher. That's the dirty little secret. And so basically, having come from the background where it's actually about the God cash a lot of the time, although my parents were very ungreedy compared to most big evangelical ministries.
Right.
But I was in the Vatican last summer, walking around and going to see the Sistine Chapel, where I'd been filming my dad's film series, How Should We Then Live, and talking to the guards saying, "Hey, I had supper on the floor here at midnight with a movie crew one time, and we were talking about it." But what Genie and I was noticing was just the tremendous wealth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on the way to that, down the hall, you're walking past Francis Bacon and Leonardo and all this art collection. Well, you look at Joel Osteen or all these evangelical hotshots or everybody who's whispering in Trump's ear, they've made fortunes.
Right.
Pat Robertson, I was on his show 7 times on the 700 Club, made $1 billion and wound up owning a diamond mine. So I wanted to say, okay, I'm asking you to take my book seriously. I'm asking for your forbearance in not making the mistakes I made, and I really want to help you.
Yeah.
But there will be no charge for this. And there's no hook here, and there's no trick. So there's no other thing to happen. It's free and will stay free forever. And so, you go to thegospelofzip.com, you're guided to YouTube, it's free. Turn the sound down, just listen to it as an audiobook. Watch
And so
it.
talk to me
That'll be
about,
it.
you decided to do this, you kind of
Yeah.
make this decision. How different was it for you to sit and, have that film crew there and be reading this book and now to be looking at it and
It
seeing
was
yourself
good
doing
to
it?
do it because Bob Burns, the producer director, is so overqualified for this. When I think about the things he's made for PBS and NPR and all this other stuff, it's insane. He's 78. He's at a point in his life when he's also doing things for people out of the goodness of his heart. But so it's crazy. It looks like a scene from The Godfather, the way it's lit. It's dark and beautiful, and the sound is perfect. It's better than anything you're going to see in a theater because he used these great old microphones from 30
Right.
years ago. So they're so warm. I mean, it's like analog 36 track recording type of style. Anyway, way past what I deserved. Happened to be a friend of a friend who lives nearby. But anyway, what I hadn't figured was watching this 8 hours 3 times through. So I'm with anybody who says, I can't watch, I'm turning the sound, I'll listen. I understand now why actors never watch the movies they're in because it's torturous. It's not that I don't like it. I think, Bob said I was doing okay, so I trusted him in it. I think he says you're a good storyteller, so it works. Okay, let's hope that's true. But watching myself that much would be like me telling you now, when you leave this interview, I want you to go stand in front of a mirror for 19 hours, study your face. This is not fun. I mean, maybe the Kardashians do shit like this, but nobody I know does.
Right, right. Yeah,
And so that was like I I earned something, not money, but I earned some kind of point somewhere for watching as I would watch and say, oh, I don't like where I did. Okay, can you just tighten that up a little, or whatever. And now it's good, it flows, it's lovely.
right.
And I say, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the number comes up, and we got it straight. And then my producer Ernie Gregg, who produced these podcasts with me, but also runs the whole show. Ernie's the one who's built this online presence, not me. I'm the dyslexic who can't pass an exam and do anything. And I'm so lucky because Ernie, who is making all this happen, is both a drop dead fantastic designer. And I met him because he designed a site for a company that had made a documentary on me a long time ago.
Mhm.
And the documentary, okay, that's fine. But I was like, who made this website? And they put me in touch with Ernie. And then we've worked together ever since.
Yeah.
And so Ernie brings an artist's eye to everything. And so he made sure that this looks good
Yeah.
and help Bob in terms of like what we're after.
And I've
And
gotten a
then,
sneak peek, so I know it does look good. I can
yeah,
speak to
yeah.
that. I can
And
say
then
that
and then
having
and then
watched a little
Ernie
of it.
Ernie basically has built this online presence, and Ernie encouraged me. So when I said I'm just going to give it away and everybody's going to think I'm crazy to work for 7 years on a book and put it out there for free, how can we use the medium? Ernie came up with all this and said, okay,
Sure.
well, we can put it online and we'll start a website called thegospelofzip.com. So people will come there and they can find it. Otherwise they won't know where to go to find it, because who knows what'll pop up from YouTube if they just type in Zip or Schaefer or whatever. So I'm really, really fortunate, because in exactly the same way that, I can't imagine my story other than the circumstances of having Genie be who she is and Zip be who he is. I've partnered with Ernie Gregg, and Ernie watches over me like a guardian angel when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
And by the way, tells me not to do certain things. When I get very like upset about something, he says, nope, don't do this. You recorded this commentary and said, I'm not putting it out, because 2 weeks from now, you'll be saying, why'd you let me do this?
Yeah.
And so Ernie, in addition to which, is very wise. And Ernie's a married man. He's married to Rock, who is his husband. They're a gay couple. In fact, I dedicate the book to them because Rock is kind of indispensable. Rock is Ernie's rock. So I get all the benefit of Ernie being in a stable relationship with a wonderful husband who's a pastor. And Ernie jokingly describes himself as a pastor's wife because he wears two hats. He's
Yeah.
Frank Schaeffer's producer, doing these videos that have 1 million views. And he watches all that stuff and keeps me from killing myself by doing stupid stuff. And then on the other hand, you can find Ernie at the local church where his husband's a pastor, washing the dishes
Yeah.
after they do a separate thing. So, Ernie is living the life and walking the walk of a person in a marriage where he's partnered. So Ernie gets our project,
And he
because
understands.
he and Rock have worked out their own thing in
Yeah.
terms of the whole opposition to gay marriage and all the rest of it.
Right.
So I dedicate the book to Ernie and to Rock. And it's not, and one of the points I make in my book is you don't do any of this alone. So I not only dedicate it to Ernie and Rock, but I also talk about my brother-in-law, John Sandry, who was a worker in my dad's ministry, but how I watched him be a different sort of a man than my father was. And I copied John. And then my sister Prisca, Priscilla, we called her Prisca, who Genie learned childcare from. How do you do this? And so I weave these people through it. You can't do this alone.
Right.
And the big message of my book is not the same people who help me can help you, because it's a different lifetime. But don't think you can do this alone. You need help. Whether
All
that's
right.
something.
I'm pushing pause on you
Yeah.
because I want to circle back to the question, because I think this relates to this. I
Yeah.
want to circle back to the why the only important book,
Yeah.
right? Because I sense part of your reason for
Hmm.
putting it out the way you're doing it is you feel a sense of urgency
I do.
that right now this is
Yeah.
a book that is needed, right?
Yeah.
Will you talk about that a little
I
bit?
will, but and you know me because I'm old and so my brain wanders, but help bring me back, and I'm not kidding.
I
Push
will.
pause again if I go
Okay.
too far. But I want to tell you a story that illustrates why this is the only important book I've ever read.
Okay.
About 20 years ago, a girl who was in high school with whatever kid of mine was in high school 20 years ago, I lose track of who was what, but let's call it 20 years ago, was a really great actress. She was Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream. And I went to the headmaster afterwards and I said, and I'm not going to use her name. And I said, all your plays are good at this school because it's a serious high school. But I said, you do realize that she's the real deal. Like this is like, could be the next Meryl Streep. This is insane. And he said, oh, no, we all know this, and so forth and so on. And then one time I become very good friends with all my kids' friends. So one time she's up here with a bunch of people. And I said, well, what are you going to do next? And she says, well, I'm going to go to Yale drama school in Yale and do that or whatever. And she went off and did that. And then a couple of years later, she comes back when she's in the area because her mom lives here. And she comes over to see us again because now Genie and I are in her orbit. When people meet Genie, they want to circle back again. And she says to me, I know you've made features in Hollywood and everything. Do you still have connections out there? Because you're going out there. I want to go out and try my luck. And she was in New York for a while and then like doing what young actors do. So I sat her down because 20 years ago, I already knew some shit. And my wife, Genie, and I had worked some stuff out. And I said, no, let me tell you something. I'm a failed movie director. I've made 4 Hollywood features. They were middling to shit, but it was a paycheck. But I know the industry. So you're not going to learn how to make a great movie from me because I never made one, but you are going to learn something about the industry. And I'm going to tell you the truth that no one out there will tell you. And that is life is short. And the only thing that really means anything to me right now is Jeannie and my children. And when you get out there, you've told me in the past you want to have a family. She had told me this. I didn't ask her. And you want a life. But here's the thing Hollywood is a drug, it's not an industry. And you will have thousands of people around you, especially because you're really talented, telling you, stick with it, so forth and so on. But I said, give it a certain amount of time, set yourself a limit. And if you're not getting any parts in that time frame, or they're all just little shit bit parts, you've got to understand something. Don't put your life on hold while you do all this shit because you are a great actress, but Hollywood is a shithole full of liars and false encouragement. And I said, I was lucky that before I got to Hollywood making my shitty movies, I already had a big chunk of my life in place because Jeannie and I had met so many years before that. But if I had gotten out there and listened to all these bullshitters telling me just go to another meeting, do all this, and I had delayed the parts of my life that actually make me want to live now, which is not sitting in a director's chair anymore making my shit movies, my life now would have turned into a tragedy. So I said, just do me a favor. When you get out there, just remember this. You know, you are going to get into this loop of like, I'll just one more casting call, one more casting call, one more casting call. But once in a while, you have to step back and say, is this how the rest of my life will be? Because you may never get there. There's all sorts of talent. So this is a long version. All right. So nothing happened for years. 10 years later, I get a Christmas card with a picture of a baby in it. And she says, everything you told me is true. I got a walk-in on house. I've been in 3 low-budget movies, but nothing has come together out here that matches my original dream. I've done all this. There was a guy that fell in love with me that I met who's another actor on the set, and we had a talk, and I told him about your talk. And he said, yeah, we should listen to that. This thing here is fine. We're doing it, but we love each other and we both want to have a family. Let's just get married and have a child. And they did. And she sent me the picture, and on the back of the picture, tear up. She says, what you told me? You're the only person in my life who 10 years ago told me there were more important things than ambition. Mm. And then she wrote a big thank you on. Well, I've gotten 3 more Christmas cards from her over the year. I get a Christmas card every year from her, but 3 of them have had pictures of her 3 kids. And on the back of each one, she writes, thank you. Now, I didn't preach in any feminist, no career or nothing to her. I just said, life is short. And don't let these fools talk you into giving away the real stuff for all this stupid dream of Hollywood making it. I failed out there, but I didn't get suckered into the lie and suddenly wake up in my mid-40s saying, what have I done with my life? It was always just the next step, and I never got there. Now, that's not to say no one should pursue a dream, but that changed the way I see things. And it changed the fact that you can give someone advice and actually save them something. It can be in all sorts of areas, but these days, what I think we need to tell people is be human first. Yeah. And it isn't career versus family, it's love versus everything. And so if I have a young son and, somebody comes to me and says, I'm dating this girl, but she's moving to San Francisco and we're both in love, but, she's going to be there and I'm going to be here. We'll try to make it work. But if it doesn't, okay, well, we're young, we'll find somebody else. I'll say, hey, think about this for a minute. You say you're in love and you've made this relationship work for 7 years. And now you're saying you're going to your job hunt, you're putting it ahead of this. can I just fast forward to the end of the story here that I'm at? And you're not me, but do you understand what you've just said in terms of what your values are? So my book basically tells people if the guy up the street puts up a Trump sign, take your stepladder up there and still help him put up his Christmas tree lights outside his house because you've always done that. Why would you change that? Because he's voting for someone you don't like. Do you believe in community or you don't? You're in love? God damn it. I'm not telling you to get married, but I'm saying you're gonna trade this in because she's moved to San Francisco. Book a fucking flight and get your ass out there and back up her career, or tell her to stay here, but don't throw away love for this. You want to be an actor? Fine, go to Hollywood and try it. But if you're 10 years in and the only thing that you ever got was two experimental low budget films and a walk on in House, and you always wanted a family and you've met an actor that you're passionately in love with, I'm glad you remembered what I said 10 years ago when you were a high school girl.
Mhm.
Thank you for the Christmas card. So basically, that's my book. And it isn't saying anything about careers or any of this other stuff, but I'm just saying, hey, let's all take a very deep breath here, whether it's how do we get on with our Trump neighbor or anything else. Take a deep breath, step back, and ask yourself a question. What really matters?
Mm.
And what really matters is not all the shit our consumer culture is selling us. What really matters is not the big paycheck. What really matters is not getting your picture online and all this shit. What really matters is not your public image, and this translates into real actions. So for instance, in the book, I talk to Genie and what really matters. And I lay out how we do things. And I don't tell anybody to do the same thing. I'm just saying, find your way. And one thing that really matters in a relationship is find things that your partner hates doing and do them. So Jeannie knows I could never pass an exam. So she does all our tax stuff. She does our accounting. She knows where the checkbook is. She does all our financial management. She did our estate planning. She ran a publishing company. What do? She hasn't unloaded a dishwasher for 25 years. I cook the meals. I go food shopping. And it's not a sort of a wokey male something. It might have been the exact opposite. If I was good at that other shit, I would do it.
It's funny, behind me, there's a picture we gave my husband on his 40th birthday, and it's
Yeah.
40 reasons we love you. And so my two kids and I all wrote different things. And one of the
Yeah.
things I have on there is that he unloads the dishwasher.
There you go.
That's my favorite.
So I've gone on
So,
too long, but you
no, but
can
let
you
me
can
just
pull me back
ask this
in.
final question, Frank. Let me
Yeah.
ask you this final question. What what do you hope can come from you putting this book out there, both from you having written it, because I don't want to diminish the having written it
Right.
piece, right? Because I mean, 7 years of work is a lot of work. And so
Yeah.
it is, I want to say to anybody who's listening, for a writer to give away 7 years of work, I know as a writer,
Yeah.
that there is something sacrificial in that, but it's also a tremendous gift. And
Yeah.
so what do you hope can come from doing this?
Well, to go back to the story I told about the young woman I talked to in high school who 10 years later sends me a picture of a child and says, thank you. You're the only person who told me what's important in life. And it wasn't go have a family and don't do a career. It was balance what matters. In all seriousness, I would love a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, if I'm still around, or have a grandchild hear it from somebody when I'm gone, that I was going to walk away from my marriage because we thought, we would run into a tough patch. But my wife and I listened to your book together and we stuck with it. And this is 10 years later, and we're really happy. Thank you for telling us that you can make things work if you'll forgive each other. I'd like to hear from someone that says, I've pursued my career from a guy, and I moved to San Francisco because I decided I love her and I'll support her career and back her because her career is important to her, more important than my stupid job. So I'm gonna go and help her out. And we're expecting a child, and I'm gonna stay home for a couple of years and back what my wife's doing. And I'd like to hear from that person 10 years from now, if I'm still around, and says, you gave me, that was good. We decided what was really important to us. Conversely, if I heard from tomorrow's Tia Levings and she says to me, I've got a husband that's beating me up And I've been told by my church to stick with it, that women are supposed to do that. Thank you for writing your book, because I've left them, because what's important to my life right now is my children, and they shouldn't be living in this. And, I've moved, and, how can I put things back together? I'd be just as glad to get that. So it's not one way of doing things. It's like, what's really important to you?
Yeah.
I would like to hear from a gay married couple who thanked me for introducing the book by dedicating it to my best friend who's gay and married, and says, thank you for doing that, because your book's not about this, because you're not a gay married man, but you obviously count this as important. And my husband and I, or my wife and I, for a gay couple, have really been heartened by that. Not only that you stood up for gay rights all these years when you were raised differently, but you dedicated your book to a gay married couple, knowing full well that will turn some people off and you'll lose readers. And basically, my message is tough, because I love Ernie and he's right to have done what he did. So I'm just hoping, in the best of all worlds, what will happen is that I have the pleasure of living long enough to know that Genie's words, because she's got more in this book than I do,
Yeah.
and her advice that I quote more and more and more as the book continues, strike a chord with some women who have been really misdirected by everything from a kind of a second wave feminism, career, forget love, or sucking up abuse in a Christian environment with a guy who won't change.
Right.
They can walk. But, when you run into Genie, you're running into genuine wisdom, and it's lived wisdom that was not learned in college, because she never went. But she's the most well-read woman I know, literally.
Yeah, you do a
So,
beautiful job in the book of talking about that. And I think that
example I'll give you from
that's
yesterday. Yesterday, I'm listening to my favorite podcast in Genie's, which is The Rest is History, with Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland, who's written an incredible book called Dominion. That's my favorite nonfiction book at the moment. But, he is a PhD in American history. Dominic is, and Tom, of course, is the premier Roman historian in Britain. And they've got a whole series on the Mitford sisters that very few Americans even know about. And about 2/3 of the series, they're explaining. And I looked at Genie and I said, but you know all about the Mitford sisters because you were talking about them. She says, well, yeah, I've read their biographies and Jessica Mitford's books. And she never says it unless you ask her, but she knows shit.
Yeah.
So this wise, self-taught polymath is my wife, and I share her wisdom in the book.
She's got good things to say.
Yeah,
And what about, do you hope that a few people might go out and get a dog?
get a mutt, get a rescue dog.
Go out there and get something. Well, Frank, I'm excited to see what comes of you putting this book out there. And
Well,
I
November
thanks for the
1,
conversation.
if you go to the gospelofzip.com, November 1st, the book will be free everywhere, and the gospelofzip.com will lead you to the book, and you're watching it and listening to it for free. And everybody likes audiobooks anyway.
And of everything that's in that book, as I said earlier, above all else, it's a beautiful, beautiful love story.
Yeah.
And, I think that that's something
And if
everybody.
Jeannie hadn't said, well, I already had a heart attack and wouldn't read it, I would have talked her into reading the bits where her voice is there. But I promise you, she really didn't want to. And I did talk about her heart attack in the book. And by the way, that my Marine son, John, saved her life, literally, and said, Mom, you're having a heart attack, and got her to the hospital 18 minutes later. And I talk about that story, saying a good thing it wasn't me, because I would have crashed the car.
Right.
But, what goes around comes around. And basically, what you don't want to do is wind up alone. That's all
Yeah.
I can tell people for sure.
Well, and I do think that there's something for everybody in this book. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what comes of it too. So
Yeah.
thanks, Frank.
Hey, and listen, Melanie, I cannot thank you enough. You know this book better than anybody else on earth, because you helped me edit, you helped me go through it, you gave me suggestions, you told me what to cut, and you've been part of this process. So I don't think there's anybody else that would actually be able to interview me on this book at this point, because no one's seen it but you, and a few other readers who have been very kind, but no one got into it to the depth you have. So I can't thank you enough, because you teach writing,
I do.
and you have written an incredible book of Hard Silence. You're going to interview me for another book you're working on.
Mhm.
And anybody that wants to watch my podcast with Melanie on her book of Hard Silence just goes back through our In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, because you need to know about Melanie's book. And our books are related.
Right, because we both come from the same a similar background. We
Family, evangelical families that hid things.
Yeah, yep. So
And we spent some of our own lives hiding things.
we did.
Yeah.
So
And I'm not anymore.
no, and you're giving it away for free. And you've
And
been
I'm giving it
very,
away for
you know,
free.
and again, very transparent in all of it. And I think I think that what draws readers or listeners to books is authenticity of the narrator. And
Yeah.
you are an authentic narrator. And I think that, your readers and listeners will be grateful for that. So
Well, I'm grateful for anybody that downloads it for free, watches it. And the only thing I would ask in return is if it's helpful, let me know.
yeah, great.
All right. Well, much love, Melanie. Seriously,
Love to
much
you
love to
too,
you.
Frank.
I'm so fond of you, and I'm
Oh,
looking forward to you interviewing me for your new book. We'll
I'm
talk about
excited.